All right, today we're diving into something that sounds like a real contradiction. We're looking at the economics of warfare and a really interesting paradox. What if war, the very thing that's supposed to be the ultimate business for the defense industry, is actually the thing that hurts it the most? There's this common idea, right, that war is just flat out good for business. I mean, for defense contractors, a conflict seems like a boom time. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's way more complicated? What if warfare itself actually starts to eat away at the very military-industrial complex it's supposed to be fueling? Okay, so to really get into this, we have to talk about the military-industrial complex. Now, this is that classic, powerful connection between a nation's military, the companies that build its weapons, and the politicians. It's supposed to be this perfect, self-sustaining relationship. But as we're about to find out, it's surprisingly fragile when it comes to the very conflicts it helps create. And this fragility, this weakness, leads us right into what we're calling the wartime paradox. This is the central idea we're going to unpack. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. The very companies that make the tools of war can end up being destroyed by them. See, the whole point of a weapon is destruction, right? But that destruction doesn't just happen thousands of miles away. Nope. The shockwaves can travel all the way back home and just wreck the operational capacity, the supply chains, really the entire future of the industry that built the weapon in the first place. So how does this paradox actually work in the real world? Well, it all starts with the most obvious and direct impact, the physical toll. Look, any industry, really, needs stability to thrive. You want predictable supply chains, you want steady production, stable prices. But war? War is the exact opposite. It's like throwing a grenade into that well-oiled machine. All of a sudden, you're hit with material shortages, resources being pulled in a million different directions, and prices that go absolutely haywire. Efficiency just goes out the window. And this isn't just, a minor headache. We're talking about a massive strain on the whole system. Those specialized alloys you need for fighter jets or the chemicals for rocket fuel, suddenly they're incredibly rare and the cost skyrockets. Then you've got resources and skilled workers getting pulled from the civilian economy to meet military demand. And the nation's strategic stockpiles, they can get burned through in what feels like an instant. And it's not just about the stuff you need to build things. It's about where you build them. The factories themselves become prime targets for the enemy. And even if your plant survives a bombing run, what good is it if the roads and ports needed to bring in supplies and ship out finished products are completely destroyed? Or if the power grid that keeps the lights on is crippled? It becomes a useless island. Okay, so this physical destruction then creates this huge ripple effect, and that leads to a crisis for two of an industry's most valuable assets, its people and its supply chains. Think about it. You can rebuild a factory. It takes time and money, but you can do it. What you can't easily replace are the brilliant minds that make everything work. War means you lose skilled engineers, scientists, and technicians, either directly in the conflict or because they're conscripted. You might take a genius engineer from a top-secret project and put them on the front lines. And on top of that, many of the best and brightest will just pack up and leave, creating this devastating long-term brain drain. And this loss of human talent kicks off a really dangerous cycle. First, all the money gets diverted from long-term research and development to cover immediate war needs. Then, all those cool, innovative next-generation projects get put on the back burner. Over time, the country's technological edge starts to fade. And what happens then? Well, you end up with massive strategic disadvantages in the future. There's a perfect phrase for the supply chain side of this problem. In peacetime, manufacturing is all about just-in-time delivery. It's super efficient. But in wartime, that system becomes just too late. See, that whole model is built on not having huge stockpiles of parts lying around. It works great when things are stable, but during a war, it's a massive liability. A single missing component can shut down an entire production line for weeks. And we have to remember, modern weapons are incredibly complex global creations. They use parts from all over the world. But during a war, suddenly embargoes and sanctions can cut you off from essential components, like microchips from another country. Just getting things shipped becomes dangerous and insanely expensive. And sometimes, all it takes is the destruction of one single specialized factory at home to create a bottleneck that brings multiple major defense projects to a grinding halt. So, let's recap. We've got physical destruction, a crisis of skilled workers, and completely shattered supply chains. What's the next domino to fall? Well, it's exactly what you'd expect. A huge financial strain on the entire country. This brings us to a classic economic concept, opportunity cost. It's pretty simple, really. Every single dollar that's spent building a tank is a dollar that isn't spent on building a school or hospital or fixing a bridge. By pouring a nation's treasure into the war effort, you're essentially starving the very civilian economy that your defense industry and everyone else ultimately relies on. Now, you might be thinking, sure, but don't defense companies make a ton of money during a war? And yeah, they do. There's often this temporary economic boom. Governments are desperate, they're buying everything in sight, and maybe not looking too closely at the price tags. But the key thing to understand is that these booms, they're just unsustainable bubbles. And when that bubble inevitably bursts, the crash is brutal. The second the fighting stops, the demand for military hardware just plummets. This means mass layoffs in the defense sector. Factories shut down, and entire towns or regions that depended on those jobs go into economic decline. It creates this incredibly volatile, unpredictable future for the entire industry. And that brings us to our final point, which is maybe the most insidious and damaging consequence of all. We're talking about a slow, creeping decline that can last for generations. See, the damage doesn't just stop when the peace treaty is signed. It's a slow decay, but it's relentless. You look 5 years after a conflict ends, and suddenly a technological lag starts to show up because of all that missed R&D. Fast forward to year 10, and the nation might find itself having to buy critical military tech from other countries. And by year 20, that once mighty industrial base can be just a shadow of what it used to be. And that is the grim legacy. What you're left with is a permanent technological gap between you and your adversaries. You lose the ability to manufacture your own advanced systems. The specialized skills in your workforce just wither away. And the bottom line, your national security is fundamentally weaker than it was before the conflict even started. So, when you put it all together, what's the real takeaway here? It's that far from being a shot in the arm for business, warfare actually acts like this corrosive acid, slowly but surely eating away at the very industrial, human, and technological foundations it needs to exist. And that leaves us with one last, really sobering question to think about. If warfare corrodes the very industry that sustains it, what is the true price of security?